My name is Gordon MacArthur. I live in Cranbrook, BC, Canada. I'm a professional athlete. I spend a lot of my time climbing in the mountains. I've been lucky enough to travel the world competing for Team Canada at the Ice Climbing World Cup series, which has led to, oh gosh, a lot of cool stories. I'm a businessman. I own a climbing gym. I ran a graphic design and marketing company for 10 years, which then led to me pursuing the dream of opening a long-term dream of climbing gym, which is really cool to transfer, like all my passion from a sport that I've dedicated so much time to into the business world and just share it through that. I'm a husband. I'm a father of two teenage girls. It's wild, let me tell you. I grew up in Ontario, just south of Toronto, the city called Guelph. I spent 18 years there. It was fine. There's lots of stories that came from that, but I'll get into that a lot later. But when I was 18, I was given the opportunity to move to British Columbia. And back when I was a younger teenager, I had heard about British Columbia. I'd heard about the mountains and, this sort of crazy land of impossible. And as I got a little bit older, I just could feel that that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to be there. I wanted to experience it. And, one day a little opportunity came about and I went for it. And here I am now. Growing up in Ontario, sports for me were everything. I did them all, except for basketball and volleyball. Wasn't a big fan of those. But I pursued things like football and hockey and badminton and tennis. And it wasn't until I got to BC that I started to pursue more so things like mountain biking, whitewater paddling, backcountry skiing, rock climbing, ice climbing. I always knew back in Ontario that I feel like I wanted more out of sports, but I wasn't quite sure. And it's kind of funny because in Ontario, I think it was maybe grade 12, we did this leadership class, and every student was asked to lead a sport that they had, interest in. And for me, it was tennis. Back then, tennis was everything for me. I followed it religiously. I wanted to beat Andre Agassi or Pete Sampras, those classic heroes of the sport. I played competitively. And it's funny, I didn't come from a rich family. I didn't come from a family with a lot of money. And so I really had to try hard to, have opportunity. Yeah, I remember once at a tournament, I think it was like the Ontario Championships or something like that. And I show up for the championship match, and the guy I was playing, came in this like super kitted out, white everything, like he was in Wimbledon or something. In Wimbledon, they require you to wear white clothes. You can't wear like collars at all. And so this guy shows up with his coaches, his whole entourage. And here I am with, like skate shoes with holes in the toes and, a racket that was well abused. And like it got into my head. I see this image of, a real champion. And, when I saw this guy walk on the court, I thought, there's no way. And, if I skip back a little bit, when I tried out for the tennis team in grade 9, didn't make it. Grade 10, didn't make it. Grade 11, the coach finally said to me, he's like, listen, like maybe you aren't really meant for this sport, like maybe you should pursue a different sport. And, that really pissed me off because I had this deep desire to be good at tennis, and I tried hard and I practiced a lot, every day, be out at the tennis courts, practicing with friends and playing, pretending we're these, athletes like Andre Agassi or whatever. And to have someone tell me that I wasn't good enough, that really resonated with me because I believed I was. And, we always want to be good at something, but I really believed that I could be good at tennis. And being rejected again for the third year in a row, it really, was sort of like the nail in the coffin. But, it was my friends that encouraged me to keep going, to keep trying. And so I ended up actually switching schools due to like moving areas in the city from my mother's house to my father's house. And so there's a rule in school that, the districts, you have to go to the school in that district. So I changed schools. And sure enough, starting of grade 12, there was an announcement for tennis tryouts. And, my friends, they should really try and go for it. And I sort of went into it with no expectations, being that I'd been turned down 3 years before it. So I went out and, crazily enough, I ended up actually making the team. And, my coach was like, you have a pretty good serve. Like, this is cool. This is a good sign. And so as the season went on, through various tournaments, I, ended up actually winning some. And It was like, I don't know where it came from, but all of a sudden I could play. And it was almost like just being given the opportunity to shine. Um, it enabled me to sort of channel that inner excitement of the sport and really let go of expectation, but more so focus on what I believed in. And so going back to that championship match with the guy and his entourage, I was super nervous because I had this image of what a champion should look like. And it was solely based on cosmetics, which is sort of a shame, but it was, and so when it came to the match, I actually ended up beating this guy. And the funny thing is, it was actually the the guy that I played in that match. He was from the previous school that I went to with the coach that had caught me from the team 3 years in a row. And so when I won, I went up to that coach and I just sort of like gave him a little wink and said, "Do you remember me?" And he said, "Yeah, I do." And he said, "It's so cool to see you have stuck with this and find success." And I guess that's sort of what this whole thing is about for me, is just exploring hope. The name of the podcast is Throwing Hope, and I want to really get into that because there's hope in everything. There's hope in every part of our day, whether it's I hope to accomplish this, or I hope to win this, or I hope to get through this, or and that's really interesting for me. Like I said, I was given that opportunity to move to BC. It's sort of a funny story. I used to work in a mall and a clothing store, and one night the guy that I was working with, I was like, "Hey man, can you go take the garbage?" And I was the manager, so I could do that. And he's like, "Yeah, yeah, sure." So he goes up, takes the garbage out. He comes back. He's like, "Dude, there's this really good looking girl at the store next to us." And I said, "Oh yeah." I said, "Well, did you go and ask her?" He's like, "No, no, I can't. I'm too nervous." And I said, "Well, I'll do it for you then." He's like, "Oh yeah, thanks, bro. That's so cool of you." So I went next door to the store, and as soon as I saw her, I was like, "Oh gosh." And I ended up asking her out myself, which is pretty funny. So I came back and I was like, "Oh man, good news and bad news." He's like, "What?" I said, "Good news is," she said, "Yeah." I said, "Bad news is, oh, I asked her." So he's like, "What?" Anyways, long story short, I started dating this girl and it was cool and she was great. And 2 weeks later, she goes like, "I have some good news and bad news." She's like, "I am moving away." And I was like, "Oh man, like I really liked this girl." And I thought like, it's only been 2 weeks. It would be great to, have a lot longer of time. And she goes, "Well, do you want to move with me?" And I said, "Well, where are you going?" She said, "BC." And instantly I was floored. Like my dream had been to go to BC for so many years. And to have that opportunity all of a sudden given to you, like that was it. So I basically sold everything in the next 3 days. I bought a bus ticket and quit my job, told my family. 3 days later, on a bus across Canada. It was like one of those things where I just knew I had to go right there and then. I just, growing up, I didn't belong in the city. I could feel like I was meant for something different. I could feel like every time I heard something about mountains or some sort of adventure sport like mountain biking or climbing or skiing or whatever, I knew that I had to at least go and try. I knew that I had to go and see what it was about. And I could just feel like if I was given the opportunity. And when that girl said to me, "I'm moving to BC, do you want to come?" I just, yeah, I knew that was it. It was meant to be. When I got to BC, I it was like this whole new world. It's like being reborn. There was just like a million things from every direction coming at me. There was ski hills, there was rivers, there was rock faces, there was mountains. It was like I couldn't even comprehend the opportunity that was laying at my feet. So I just went after it. I got involved in everything. I did everything. I tried everything. I tried to be as good as I possibly could at all these new sports, and it was amazing. It was like Christmas every day, just learning about how to be a better skier, learning about how to be a rock climber. In Ontario, going back to the story of like that class where when we were given the opportunity to teach the others in the class our sport that we were into, I chose tennis, and this guy named Justin, he took us climbing at the climbing gym, and I remember when we got there, I was like, man, like, this looks cool. And I could just feel that instant desire to be good at this sport. And it's funny because all the sports I've done, football, soccer, tennis, badminton, hockey, baseball, everything I've played, even getting into BC with backcountry skiing or resort skiing or ice climbing or climbing or whitewater paddling or whatever, there was something about climbing that always just stuck with me. There's something about climbing that, I would sell various pieces of gear to get other gear, but I never touched the climbing gear. I always just knew I needed that. When I first got to BC, I was living in this little town in the mountains. It was small for me growing up in the city just south of Toronto. It was the exact opposite of what I was used to. The crazy thing is, when I first got to this small town, its name was Invermere. Um, I hadn't even been there for like 20 minutes. And, at the time, my girlfriend was sort of showing me around town, and someone says, "Oh, you're Gordon, right?" And I was like, "How do you know that?" And as I learned, in small towns, everybody knows everything about everybody. And so that was an interesting learning curve as well, which we'll get into much later. But just the adapting from city life and all the chaos to like everything being almost like slowed down and in front of you and more time. It was just so cool. But like I experienced many times over, that lasted for a little while, but all of a sudden I found myself needing more. Okay, I've got here. I've tried all the sports. Now I want to do more. What else is out there? And that led me to, moving to Whistler. Whistler is chaos in a bottle. It's literally this bubble that doesn't exist outside of the world. And it's just go, go, go 24/7. I worked a job 7 days a week. We partied a lot. We lived in a trailer in a parking lot in the middle of winter. It was nuts. I'll get into that story as well down the road. But it was just, one thing after the other. I couldn't stop moving. But when I left Whistler, because it got to the point where either you get out now or you stay for life. And the intensity of Whistler was like, it was mind blowing. I couldn't do it anymore. There was just too many things happening that I couldn't keep up with. And it was just leading to, I don't know, too much chaos, I guess. So I moved back to Invermere. And, within a couple of months, I decided I'm going to go to school, which was a surprise to everybody because I was sort of done with school after I left Ontario. I had aspirations to be an animator. That was a big deal for me growing up through various grades of school. Art was everything. Aside from sports, it was art. I spent countless hours trying to be the best artist I could be. I wanted to be an animator for Disney. There's a huge aspiration of mine. I had friends who had gone to the right schools to become animators for Disney, and that was super inspiring to me. So I spent a lot of my time in high school dedicating every effort to being a great artist. But even that, sort of fell by the wayside once sports took over. And so I had sort of left school behind pursuing outdoor adventure in BC, but I could still feel that draw of wanting to learn more as far as education went. So, I registered for school in this other town called Cranbrook, just south of Invermere, sort of like that corner of BC, eastern corner of BC. And so I went to school, and very quickly I found out that moving to a town, going to school, I needed a job. And that's when things really started to take a turn. I guess you could say almost for the better. It was a very long process, but it sort of began with the idea of getting a job. And I got a job at this place, and it'll forever be one of the most integral parts to my life. The store was called Jarek Sports. And this guy, my boss, he gave me an opportunity. And gosh, I spent, off and on probably 10 years at that store. And there were so many life lessons. My goodness. I can't even begin to get into those right now. But that store forever changed my life and set me on a path that I was, meant for. And I'll forever be grateful for everybody that I crossed paths with in that store and what it led to. At the time, I wanted to be good at everything. I was excited about every sport. I wanted to pursue every aspect of every adventure sport that was offered in the mountains. Whitewater paddling, downhill skiing, backcountry skiing, ice climbing, rock climbing, mountain biking, cross country, and downhill. I got into all of it. I raced downhill on the BC and Canada Cup Series for a while. I got into climbing. I pursued ice climbing. I got into whitewater paddling. Had this horrific accident. I was heli lifted out of a raging river in the US, paralyzed, almost drowned, bananas. Needless to say, I backed away from that sport. But the point was is that I wanted to do it all. I wanted to be involved with everything. But there was still something about climbing that kept bringing me back. There's still this aspect that would draw me towards climbing. And it was a strong pull, and more so than the other sports, whether it had been sports in high school. Like I said, I wanted to play tennis. I wanted to be the best tennis player in the world. But still, climbing went a little bit deeper. And at the time, I didn't understand what it was about, but it was still there and I couldn't ignore it. Again, like climbing started in high school when that guy Jessen in our leadership class took us all to the gym and I was hooked. It was like this instant, like I found what I was looking for. And that progressed over time. When I lived in Toronto or south of Toronto, I went to the gym all the time and I was in that scene. And when I moved to BC, I got into the outdoor scene. And I guess like there was a point though in climbing for me that struck pretty deep, and I just felt this deep desire to be better. I could feel that there was something about this sport that told me there's a lot of opportunity on me discovering how to be my best, which I'd never really felt before with any other sports. Tennis was close, but climbing took me to this place where I knew that I could be, whether it be a better person, a better athlete. I could explore how strong mentally I could be, all these things. And so that's sort of where it began. And there were instances that sort of spurred things on. Like one year, my friend and I were driving through this place called Canmore, Alberta, which is like the Rocky Mountains. And there was this ice festival, and we're like, whoa, that looks cool. So we pulled over, and we saw all these people climbing, competing, and it was just the coolest thing. Of course, it was a big festival, so there was tents, there was professional athletes everywhere, signing autographs, and we saw this one booth, and it said free clinics, and we're like, well, geez, like, why don't we do the free clinics? And so we signed up for all these free clinics. Now, back then, clinics were free. It's crazy. Now they're expensive, but we have to pay for athletes somehow. So anyways, clinics were free. We signed up for them. And the two that we signed up for, one was with Will Gadd. Will Gadd is the most prolific ice climber basically ever. He's super accomplished, dear friend of mine. He ended up coaching me, mentoring me, unbelievable. But going back then, we took the clinics. The other guy was Sean Isaac, cutting edge as far as like mixed climbing and that new fringe style of climbing, alpine climbing. Like he was pushing limits. And so my friend and I, we took these clinics and we just couldn't believe what we were doing. Like we were ice climbing, we were mixed climbing, we were doing it. And I could feel this like electric current going through me. Like, this is it. Like, this is what I want. And that's basically that desire for, winter climbing, I guess, or climbing in general started there. And I just poured all my energy into being better at that sport, specifically ice climbing and mixed climbing. Mixed climbing is when you use your ice axes on rock and ice. And so I went after it. I like begged these people, like guys like Sean Isaac, Will Gadd, Barry Blanchard, one of the most decorated alpinists ever, which we also took a clinic with him, and it was hilarious. But I would constantly bother these guys, like, take me out, teach me more. And finally, they're just like, okay, fine. And they, succumbed to me, pressuring them into teaching me. And that, that led to more. And then, from there, I just started to get the idea of like, okay, I'm going to compete now, because I saw that first competition. So, I competed at the Canmore Ice Festival. I was terrible. I was up against some of the world's best. So it wasn't an official like World Cup back then, but it was this event that everybody went to. It was so well sought after that you had athletes from all over Europe, Russia, whatever. And it was like amazing, but I got absolutely slaughtered. But that, instead of like deterring me, it actually made me want to like try harder and get better and learn more and dig deeper. And so, one thing led to the other. And, I started to see things like the Ouray Ice Festival. Now, the Ouray Ice Festival is probably one of the most successful festivals for ice climbing ever. They had this like super elite comp that the best of the best would go to. And I was like, that's what I want. And so, I went after that, and that was cool. And then that led to meeting people on that kind of level that said, hey, like, you should compete at World Cups. A friend of mine, Mark Beverly, he was into it, and very successful mountain guide, climber. And he's like, dude, like, you should come with me to the World Cups. It's like next level. So then, I went after that. Again, first few years got slaughtered. But instead of thinking that, oh, I suck, poor me, I'm going home, I could just feel that deep desire pushing me to this new level of like mental toughness, try hard, what I'm capable of. I could just time after time, failure after failure, I could feel like there's still more. There's still room to improve. I could still be better at this sport. And of course, as I found a bit more success, I got into putting up my own routes. I was very motivated and inspired by people developing routes out in the mountains that I wanted to do that. And luckily, where I live, there was this endless opportunity. There's this beautiful canyon close to home called the Bull River. And that's basically where my career launched. I could see lines, I could see these routes before they even touched. I could see them and I could feel how cool they would be and just the opportunity to, descend into this 110-foot canyon with a raging waterfall and then climb out. Like, how cool is that? And so I got into putting up routes, developing my own lines. And then from there, gained a bit of attention. So I learned about the whole sponsorship aspect of being an athlete. And that is not an easy realm to tap into. I felt that I was very lucky because I had this design and marketing background that I could effectively sell myself, and people bought into that. And I wasn't the best. I wasn't even that great, actually, but they could see my passion and desire to try harder. They could see that willingness to push harder than some. And so that got my foot in the door. And from there, I was lucky enough to put up certain routes that, were published in magazines and, movies were made of. And then that led to bigger routes. And, eventually I ended up establishing what was my hardest route ever and one of the bigger routes in the world. And it was a wild experience. And, later I'll tell you about that. It was called the Storm Giant. And there's a lot of politics around that route. And despite sort of what came of it, it was still, for me, one of my most successful moments in my climbing career. Probably the coolest part about pursuing climbing and the level to which I've gotten to, World Cups, for example, I've been able to travel the world dozens of times, places like Russia, I've been to the Kremlin, walked Red Square, China, I've walked the Great Wall of China. I mean, these experiences that were given to me through climbing and competing, man, I could have never have dreamt that, being that kid as a gym rat in Guelph, Ontario, trying to be better. I never would have thought that I would be, climbing in Switzerland or hanging out in caves in France. Like, I can't express how grateful I am for what the sport did for me and the opportunities that it gave. Like, just mind blowing. It's literally been, I don't know, professionally 11 years. And I often get asked, like, why do you keep going? Or how do you keep going? I'm getting older now. I mean, when I was younger, you take the hits, you keep trying, you had the energy. 40 years old now, almost 41, and things hurt more. Things are slower. Yet, like from that younger age, even when I was 17, 18, when I felt that desire of being my best, my absolute, that never hasn't, it's never gone away. It's still there. And that's something that is like, I don't know, it sticks with me every single day. You just believe that you're still capable. People have told me over the years, you're not capable, you can't do this, you're not going to win, blah, blah, blah. And, sometimes that's actually sat pretty heavy on me. This is one time we were at a World Cup in Bozeman, Montana, and a fellow athlete came up to me and says, I'm going to beat you this year because you're losing it. It's over for you. And I was like, this is like kind of a friend, co-athlete, co-teammate. And I was like, really? And it really got to me. It really like sat heavy on me. My coach is like, dude, you got to shake that off. You got to just let that go and perform how you can perform. And, there's so much that I can't wait to share with everybody about mental toughness. And this was one of those defining moments where you had to choose between giving up and going forward. And so, we worked through a lot of the things that I've discussed for many years on how to be mentally tough, tools that I've been given on how to get past mental blockings, like this weird sense that I can't. And so we went through those steps, and, it turns out that I beat him and, became North American champion. So super cool moment. And I guess going back to that desire that's still with me on, it's not over yet. Like, there's so much more to give. There's so much more that I am capable of. Yeah, I might be older now and I might be a little bit slower and things hurt more. But when you've got that that mental capacity to trust in your desire to keep going, that you're capable to still move. Really, there's nothing that can stop you. Like the limits are endless, you know? I had the opportunity to work with one of the more decorated sports psychologists in North America. His name was Mike Gervais, and then with him, Adam O'Neill. And Mike Gervais was one of the co-authors of The Rise of Superman, which is a sweet book. It was kind of based around finding flow state. And flow state is that moment where your performance and your mind are one. It's perfect. It's hard to explain, and I've been there. There's a few times where I've experienced, a success with something, and I can't really tell you what it was like because I don't really remember. Only that I know that it happened. It's almost like this blankness because your body and your mind perfectly dance together. It's incredible what you're capable of when you enter flow state. And that book, The Rise of Superman, is based around the study with adventure athletes and how they got into flow state. Incredible book. Anyways, so with Mike and with Adam, we spent a lot of time exploring my mind and my mental toughness and how to improve that in competitive sport. And oh gosh, I got so many cool stories about that. Later, we'll get to it. But the whole idea of dreams and seeking out what's impossible to you, to me, that's always resonated very deeply. I often get asked about the story of my climbing gym. My gosh, like, you want a story. The idea of training to be better, you need certain tools. And for me to be a top tier athlete in a specific sport, I had to train. And I often found myself leaving town to go and train at other places because that's all I had. And that sort of made me think, well, how do I stay at home and raise two daughters and be a husband and work and still train? And many people said, that's impossible. You can't do it. But I couldn't bite into that. I couldn't believe that. And so I got into this idea of building a home sort of climbing wall. And, there's a few murmurings of people doing that, really hardcore climbers, like they would build these woodies in their basement or whatever. And so I used that as inspiration. And that inspiration went from one thing to the next, and I kept building onto it. And then finally I said, I'm going for it. And one time in Russia, I woke up in the middle of the night with this idea, and it was to build this massive arch. Now in Russia, one of the training facilities is a big arch. And so it came from that, I guess. But I just felt like to be the best I can be, I needed to have the best to work at that. And for me, that was the big arch. And of course, that led to the climbing gym. I was like, I want to train indoors and I want to just share my passion with everybody around me. And that was the climbing gym. That was the essence of a facility that people could come to. And that's sort of where it started. In my basement, my friend and I said, we got to build a climbing gym. And over the years, we, would pick away at it. It cost a ton of money. We didn't have them. I didn't have the capital. And when the idea sort of came about, climbing gyms hadn't skyrocketed yet. Now that industry is it's nuts. But back then it was still not a fringe thing, but it wasn't very popular. And so over the years, certain opportunities would lead to another opportunity. It was like searching for treasure. You look for a clue and you think, okay, and then you find another clue and you think this is the treasure. Oh no, it's just another clue to the treasure. That's sort of how it was for me with the climbing gym. It's like one more piece of the puzzle en route to opening a gym. And man, we came close a couple of times where we literally had the bank saying, we're going to lend you all the money. It's going to be awesome. It was nuts. And the whole deal fell through an hour later, absolutely heartbreaking. Point of the story is that one thing led to another, and that dream, that desire of something more, that desire that I could be better, or there was still more to my absolute. With the gym, I knew that it had to happen. I knew there was a reason why I couldn't let it go. I knew that I had to keep pursuing that dream. Even though it felt impossible, even though it fallen through a bunch of times, I knew that there was more to it. And I wasn't going to give up. As much as it sucked to accept defeat many times over, I knew that I could pull it off at some point. So eventually, it happened. It was one of the most incredible moments of my whole life when we opened the doors for that first day. We had done it. We went to the ends of the earth to make it happen, and we pulled it off. It was so cool. And now, I guess that's a quick and dirty of me and where I came from, how I got to where I am now, and what an absolutely mind-bending time it is now. As we all know, COVID is like crushing this world. Um, I have never experienced anything like this. You talk about mental toughness and the pursuit through chaos. If I've learned anything in all the books I've read, there's a book called The Way of the Champion that the guys, the sports psychologists, Adam and Mike, they gave me the book and they're like, this book, it's about being a champion. And by the way, champion, I don't mean like on the top of a podium. I mean champion reaching your absolute. And to me, that's a true champion. When you come to a moment where you feel like you gave it 100%, that is a champion. And I have like the coolest story with that. Again, a bunch of years ago, I think 2014, at a World Cup, and it was in the U.S., so it was kind of like home soil, I guess, sort of, as in like most comps are based in Asia and Europe, so U.S. is close enough to Canada. So, anyways, we're competing. The qualifiers are there. We get through the qualifiers. I did well. A bunch of my friends were there. A lot of people were psyched on the comp. It came to semifinals, and no Canadian had reached finals in like 14 years. I think Will Guy was the last one to make a final of the World Cup. And so I had the climb of my life and I made the final. It was like the coolest feeling to be one of those that had sort of broken the mold. At World Cups, a lot of the Koreans and the Russians have dominated the sport for many, many years. So to be a Canadian and step into that new upper tier, it was amazing. And so during the finals, I remember coming out of isolation because you have to be in this area where you can't watch this climb, and so you're brought out for your turn, and there was like 3,000 people screaming their brains out. It was electric. And I remember getting on the wall and getting to this one move where I couldn't do it. Like I was literally hanging there for 2 minutes trying to figure out how to get to this move, and I couldn't do it. And as I've watched the video many times, you can hear the crowd going like, come on, come on. And they're like, oh, oh. Now I didn't fall, but my one ice axe kept popping off the hold. And finally, there was a moment where everything just clicked. And that's that flow state I was talking about, where my mind and my physical body danced. And I pulled through the move, and I'll never forget in the video, I can hear my coach like, yeah, like it was just this moment where everything was perfect. And so, funny enough, next move I fell. But the results, though, turned out to be many others in the finals fell. And I ended up coming fourth place. Now, would I have loved to have won? Yeah, of course. We always want to win. But in that time, that fourth place, to me, that was the gold medal. That was like, I climbed to my absolute. I climbed the best I'd ever climbed. I got through this crazy like physical and mental block and pursued that absolute that was waiting for me. And yeah, I felt the next move, but that was okay. It didn't matter. And yeah, I was on the podium, but that didn't matter. It was the fact that I had reached my absolute, that level of flow state where everything was just so perfect. And the excitement that came from that was like nothing I'd ever experienced before. I'd won championships in the sports before. It's lots of cool moments, but that specific moment was perfect. And we celebrated that night like we'd all won. It was just the community that was around that was like nothing I've ever experienced. Going back to the COVID thing and like the mental capacity to navigate such chaos, everything's changed. Everything. Nothing will be as it was. We wear masks now. Social shaming has reached detrimental levels. We sanitize every other second of the day, which we should. It's crazy, like the things that we're doing now that we find such an inconvenience, yet really we're just trying to be healthier. But the holdups that have come from COVID, no travel, restrictions on how your everyday lives are. Like, my gosh, my kids were home for 5 months. Like, they came home in March. And, the first couple of months, it's sweet. We're all hanging out. We're watching movies, whatever else. But then it wears thin in the tooth. Trying to entertain teenagers at home every day. You can't go anywhere. You can't do anything outside your house. You get cabin fever pretty quick. But, yeah, like, COVID has just, it's just altered everything. Right now I'd be overseas competing, but we can't. Business wise has been so hard. Like the government lays out these protocols that restrict your business to the point where it's crippling. And, personally, I don't know if we're going to get through this. I have friends in the province next to us in Alberta. Their climbing gyms have closed down now for the second time. Like it's a scary time. There's no certainty. There's no, you know, I don't think yet, even with the vaccine coming, I don't see the light at the end of the tunnel yet. I'm not convinced. My hope has been like hurt. And, you know, I think about all the books I've read on mental toughness and things. It feels like you don't have the right tools right now. It feels like you're just in a survival mode. You're not in attack, you're in defense. And you just got to kind of wonder, like, how do we get through this? I love the idea of being able to talk this out. My pursuit in the last 20 years has been to be my absolute. It's been a hard journey. A couple of days ago, I got back from Ontario in amongst this COVID chaos because my brother had died. Moments before I had heard the news of that, I was told by a friend that our mutual friend had taken his life. This whole COVID thing has played such a role, or this it's taken a toll on people's lives in a heavy way, mine included. The point of this is I just need to talk. I just need to share with you. I need to give you my experiences and listen to your experiences and share how did you do that? How did we get through that? How are you going to do that? What is your plan? I don't have the answers. I've had a lot of experiences in this lifetime, good and bad. I grew up in a broken family, an abusive mother, an alcoholic father, a grandma that held us all together. I saw my sister the other day for the first time in 15 years. Like, life has not been the easiest road, but we all have that. We all have our stories. We all have these experiences, these instances that have shaped us. I think about pain a lot. I think about the physical pain, the emotional pain. And it's funny, there's research that shows that often we can't tell the difference between physical and emotional pain. When it feels like you got hit by a truck, well, let me tell you, it feels like you got hit by a truck. There's no difference. The weight of feeling, or the weight of being hit with 2 deaths inside of 20 minutes, it felt like I got hit by a truck like twice. And I think about those things and how pain shapes us. Pain isn't fun, but sometimes it's necessary. Sometimes you wouldn't wish it upon anybody. And this is to talk about that, to open the mic to that, to allow for you to share that, for me to give my experiences and what I've gone through and how I've navigated it and the successes of that and even the failures of that, to warn you against, don't shove a fork in a light socket. It hurts. Don't do it again. There's my advice. I want to share that on this platform. And I've sat around contemplating the idea of all these thoughts in my head. I've had so many cool things happen. Like I said, like I walked the Great Wall of China. I've had the experience of climbing with some of the most amazing people. So what's next? What is the point of this? Stories, people, places, experiences, athletes, relationships, sports, beer, kids, mountain bikes, climbing, business, successes, failures. Like, it's all here. There's no one thing to tell you what this is about, only that I want to give it all and share it all and listen to all of what you have to say as well. I want to talk about chasing dreams, having the capacity to see what's impossible and say to yourself, I'm going anyways. To have that courage to walk along the edge and not be scared, but to smile and keep walking. It's about the courage to get up every morning. And that, I gotta tell you, is one of the hardest things about my day, is getting out of bed. Being in bed under a blanket where it's warm, it's the safe place you don't want to leave. There's a whole scary world out there waiting to crush you. And the idea of getting up and that battle day in and day out. My gosh, putting on clothing, getting dressed every day, it's so hard. Brushing your teeth is so hard. Eating is so hard. Staying hydrated is so hard. But if you can find the will to see past the impossible and treat it like the inevitable, then I tell you, you have what it takes. You've got hope that you can grasp onto and then find the courage to go after it day in and day out.